Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Etisalat SMB Digital Academy webinar. My name is Mark Forker. I'm the editor of CNME, one of the region's leading IT and technology publications. I'm absolutely delighted to be the moderator for today's session, which will focus on the importance of business mobility. Business mobility allows companies to compete more aggressively, operate more efficiently, and ultimately enhance their engagement with their customers. When you leverage business mobility for your organization, you simplify the management process and meet business and customer expectations. And this is critical for SMBs to thrive and survive in the experience economy that we are now immersed in. I'd like to give our viewers a quick overview of today's agenda before we start our session. Very shortly, I'll hand over to Assam Mahmood, Senior Vice President at Etisalat, to deliver his presentation on the importance of business mobility. Following that, we will then have a presentation from Adil Al-Falasi, Head of Abu Dhabi Office at Oliver Wyman, to give his views and perspectives on the importance of business mobility for SMBs. After Adil's presentation, we will then examine a case study from Hassan Iftikhar, Consulting Partner, Technology, Media and Telecom at Deloitte Middle East. And following that presentation, we will then have a Q&A session with all our speakers to explore in greater detail some of the insights and perspectives that have been shared by our esteemed speakers. Now, without further ado, I'd like to kickstart today's session, and please let me introduce Assam Mahmood, Senior Vice President of Etisalat, to deliver the opening presentation of today's session. Over to you, Assam.
Assalamu alaikum and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Business Mobility Matters. First of all, on behalf of Etisalat, I would like to thank you for joining us today as we shed the light with the experts' insight, visions, and best practices on effective business mobility strategies that can transform your businesses. As we all know, that mobility is among the latest technologies that trends the revolutions, the way we operate, and also provided businesses with a great competitive advantage over their rivals. First of all, moreover, there has never been a need of a business mobility than now. Business all over the world has transformed their workplaces from a centralized office model to a remote and hybrid working options that where they not only empower their workforce with the business devices, but also have made the use of cloud technologies to access most of their data. In fact, there are many and multiple workplace mobility that resulted in a significant impact on modern day businesses. The business mobility created innovative and created a revolutionary business models, boosted productivity, and also decreased the expenses, empowered employees, and also facilitated business continuity as well. However, having said that, it's very, very, very crucial for the organizations to implement a clear strategy and have a policy in place that can take care of elements such as the usage, the security, and also the governance. And also I need to mention, it's very equally important to note that the embracing mobility is not limited to technology or to business solutions. It actually requires throughout understanding of the requirements of the employees, the planning, policies, process also. So therefore, all senior management should have the responsibility of embedding the business mobility in the cultures of their company, of their employee, in their policies, and also the philosophies and user experience to ensure that the businesses can benefit from transforming workplace to a mobile ecosystems. And we as Etisalat continuously also improving, continuously striving on the digital transformation of a business who manage the conventional office phone lines, networks, and infrastructures to agile organizations that run their business on higher speed internet, utilizing our reliable fiber optic networks. Given that business mobility is a key element in the business ecosystem, Etisalat has also empowered the companies by various integrated solutions that can allow their employees to carry their line extensions in their pocket to keep them connected to their office while they are moving, and also allowing the customer to reach them while they are on the move. Such solutions allow the employees to call the extension of their colleagues at work as if they are sitting at their desk. So Etisalat also constantly enriching our platform, our business edge, our hero products, that the comprehensive digital platform that caters all the businesses and mobility needs in order to make the business digital transformation easily. Without further ado, finally, I would like to conclude that the business mobility includes various elements of daily business operations, and I will leave the floor to our subject matter experts who are joining us today to shed the lights on the opportunity that business mobility brings to organizations and provide you with a clearer view on how to implement an effective strategy that earns you greater rewards of your business. Thank you very much and enjoy your day.
Thank you, Assam. A great overview of today's topic, and you've perfectly set the tone for the conversation for the rest of today's session. And very interesting to hear how Etisalat's integrated solutions have really empowered your customers. And we'll speak a little bit more about that when you join us for the Q&A session after the presentations have concluded. So thanks, Assam, for now. I'd now like to invite Adil Al-Falasi, Head of Abu Dhabi office at Oliver Wyman, to deliver his presentation. So Adil, the floor is yours.
Assam had a very interesting opening talking about the importance of business mobility driving change. What we know for a fact that businesses right now are going through waves of disruption caused by so many things and from different, whether it's the pandemic, whether changes in geopolitical landscape, not to mention the technological disruption that is changing or putting so much pressure on businesses to reinvent their operating model. In such climate, it's very important for businesses to reinvent themselves, and innovation becomes a core principle when it comes to dealing with changes. And if you look at businesses right now, they tend to adopt one of two strategies: either become quite defensive, where they actually focus on outliving the present disruptions and in the current businesses, but also there is the offensive strategy when they try to focus on riding the coming disruptions in the current or new lines of businesses. In both strategies, organizations need to continue innovating in all aspects, whether they work with existing businesses as well as future businesses, but also how they can deal with short-term survival as well as thriving on the long term. The question is how to prioritize and balance your bets, and this is quite crucial question that each organization, no matter how small or big, need to ask themselves, and because leaders of organizations, they don't have an infinite amount of resources. So it's very important they allocate the right resources across the different parts of portfolio. And there is something called the 4-zone model. And what we mean by that 4-zone model is like how organizations can prioritize their collective bets either on the defensive play or the offensive play, and and then dividing the priorities and the supporting initiatives into those four. The zone management approach divides the organization priorities and supporting initiatives into 4 zones, which then leaders can use to clearly define and balance their bets at any given time. We talked about, you know, the importance of allocating whatever resources across each of the 4 zones in order to develop a portfolio of initiatives. For example, if you look at the on the blue side, the defensive side, there are more bets in bulking up revenue in the current market and also controlling cost. On the offensive, the green side has more on the identifying novel ideas and how to actively implement them. While the zones are managed holistically to ensure strategic alignment, secluding them also help minimizing internal conflicts and to provide appropriate room for each of the zones to deliver the intended result. Because each zone needs to have its own clear set of objectives. It needs to have a different operating model. It also needs to have a very clearly defined and specific return on investment horizon, which sometimes can be one of the challenges faced with new ideas. And not to mention, the management need to have clear and a different risk profile and reward trade-offs. What I want to say here about, if I start talking about each sides of the horizon, there is the defensive side, which is about, you know, how we can protect the core business today and what can be done for sustaining innovation. And here most organizations are pursuing an incremental growth, how they can manage through their day-to-day businesses through optimization, whether it's improving revenue gradually or whether they can work on optimizing for efficiency effectiveness. While it's necessary to maintain profitability, we need to keep in mind that this can actually narrow the scope of opportunities organizations give themselves permission to pursue and leave them deeply vulnerable for disruption. That's why it's important to balance with the future outlook and looking at disruptive innovation. And organization must switch to a longer horizon, adapt a more systematic approach towards discovery of disruptive opportunities. Some of these opportunities tend to have high growth potential, and sometimes it's important to pursue those even at the sake of near-term profits. This is the only way for organizations to reinvent themselves and catch the next wave that will propel them forward. And here we look at the, you know, horizon 2 or horizon 3, where actually you take an idea and make sure it materializes, and then on the horizon 3 you take that innovation and make sure you take it all the way through and put it on an accelerated track. What are the challenges that we face when it comes to implementing the 4-zone model? If you go to the next page, please. So here we realize that in order to implement innovation and adopting it as a discipline, it needs to be applied at every step of the process. There are several areas where we see common failures across the 4 phases. For example, within the generation phase, organizations typically fail at placing their bets correctly in line with the enterprise strategy. That's why it's very important to identify opportunities that build upon their successful lines of business, or what can be called the crown jewels. In the selection phase, organizations struggle with making ideas compete with each other in order to select the strongest innovation candidate. The best way to deal with this is to create a well-balanced portfolio of initiatives by leveraging a VC, a venture capital-like business review process. When incubating initiatives, organizations generally fail at unpacking and developing ideas using go-to-market frameworks. That's why it's important to manage resources appropriately to avoid over or under investing, and then it's important to coach and hold stakeholders accountable for driving that change. And in the graduation phase, common failures include scaling emerging innovation to a material size and redirecting resources to bring the organization together to embrace and support new innovation. Hence, making tough decisions to reallocate the resources from existing business to ensure the innovation can scale to materialize revenue. What we want to say here, embracing innovation is not easy, and it requires an organization-wide adoption of innovation as a discipline. If you go to the next page, please. And to build innovation as a discipline, it's important that you have certain capabilities that are in place in order to bring the best results out of the organization. First, you need to define your innovation strategy and be clear about where the initiatives are heading. You need to narrow down your focus in order to optimize efforts. 2, shield the innovation effort from the constraints of day-to-day operations. Assign separate leadership, budget resources, performance criteria, and space. Then make sure that you follow a structured and repeatable process to identify, select, and incubate opportunities. Make sure that you adopt a demand-based approach, starting with the problem, not the product. And Sam talks about agility. Perhaps the agile model first came from software companies like Spotify. It's very important being in such a fast-paced work approach to be agile. The Spotify model talks about 2-week sprints, 90 days cycle. It's very important that the work operating model yield into tangible outcomes. And for those outcomes, you make sure you set a very high bar to incubate opportunities. Use venture stage gate investments as every 90 days, call the play. And lastly, your workforce is perhaps one of the most crucial elements in realizing that innovation. Your workforce needs to be adaptive to disruptive change and innovation. Upskill the workforce so they can contribute to innovation. And I'm going to stop here and wait for questions.
Thank you very much, Adel. Absolutely brilliant presentation there. Very interesting. I've never heard of innovation discipline, so looking forward to find out a little bit more about that during our Q&A session later. Now it's time for our next presentation. I'd like to hand over to Hassan Iftikhar from Deloitte Middle East to give his presentation. So the floor is yours, Hassan.
Thanks, Mark. Very interesting conversations that I've heard so far on the topic, and on a very, very relevant topic in a world where we have experienced business mobility reach new heights. Isam, Adil, thanks for sharing your thoughts. So if I take that forward, I'll spend some time going through how we take digital enablement of the small and medium business and enterprises forward, and how certain concepts from tech companies and ICT and telco players are also enabling that. We will do that with a lens of a case, but we'll narrate the conversation from the perspective of 3 questions, which I'll come to. But just to begin with, and carry on also, as you mentioned, some very important points around the cultural fit of the businesses and organizations in how the demand side and the supply side is innovating, and also the role of platform in growing the SMB sector. And then Adil, on your side, you spoke a bit about the strategic horizon. So if we take a step back, the transition that the SMB sector is going through in the current era is in our point of view, being driven by Industry 4.0, which really it revolves around 4 key aspects. So to begin with, there's the strategic remit to this, where as a global survey that we have ran recently at Deloitte, we understand that the executives tend to agree that having the strategies geared towards enablement of Industry 4.0 leads to bigger rewards. And where those strategies are not in place, it's really hard for, whether that's an SMB or it's a larger enterprise, to really reap the benefits of the emerging tech. Talking of tech, when we ask executives, we also hear back that there are some technologies that are at the forefront of leading the businesses of tomorrow forward. 3 of them that stand out are Internet of Things, artificial intelligence, and building the businesses in cloud. Now, all of that requires obviously certain skills and competencies to be built in the business, which have not been essentially part of the way businesses were built up, bottom up. And here the view from the leadership of from the various regions across the globe is that there is absolutely a clear need for the right skills to be there, whether that's around some of the technologies we just covered, but only 20% of the executives believe that they currently do have the skills that they need for flourishing their businesses and going into different dimensions and adjacencies tomorrow. And finally, we also hear from the executives that there is an absolutely new metric to measure in businesses around the societal impacts, and that can be around contributing back towards society, the impact towards the climate change, and being more sustainable towards where the businesses are based. So, off the top of the mind of business leaders, those are the 4 key pillars that will define the future of how well the businesses will survive and flourish in an era that is driven by the 4th industrial revolution. So I spoke about the 3 questions. We will spend the next 8 or so minutes on 3 important questions when it comes to the SMB growth. The first one we'll talk about is on how digitally mature an SMB is, and what really the SMB ecosystem can do to be more digitally mature and aware as they move forward in their businesses. The second question we would address is how the technology ecosystems can support the SMB growth. And here really, I think a topic absolutely core to also our region here is how the platform business models are evolving and how the platform business models are disrupting the more linear way of doing business of the past. And again, I think here the digital leaders in our regions and in the country and the telco incumbents are playing an absolutely different role in the future that we see. And then finally, but a very important question is, from where do we get the right incentives in place that enable the growth that we are all aiming for when it comes to the SMB sector? So on the first question on the digital maturity and how do we accelerate digital for the SMB sector. So we at Deloitte, we look at digital maturity from sort of a 2-dimension map, if you want to see it that way. So there are a number of criteria assigned across how the businesses are approaching the customers, how the orders are being placed, and how the customers are buying, and how they are being serviced throughout the journey that they have with a certain business. And throughout this, there are certain metrics to be built in, which evolve as the maturity of the business evolves digitally. Strategy, a very, very important component, where making the right strategic choices in a business being more digitally mature is important. Making the choices around technology, whether that's the front end of reaching the customers or the back end of managing the operations and the supply chain of the SMB, all the way through from the applications down to the enterprise architectures, the networks, connectivity, and so on. Again, making the right decisions in what would really support the business to achieve its desired digital outcomes. We also see core areas around operations of the business, where there is a massive opportunity to bring agility, robotics, and certain other elements of advanced AI to help digitize the operations. Finally, but a very, very important pillar of this maturity is the culture. And in my point of view, also perhaps the most difficult one to land. But without those capabilities built in the people of the organization and the workforce, gelled around with the right culture, it's really hard to achieve the levels of digital maturity that SMBs would want to target. Now, once we look at the maturity itself across those dimensions, then the question becomes, all right, so I know where I want to get to in terms of the digital ambition. How do we get there? On this, we again at Deloitte, we look at the pathway to being digital across what we call the DNA of the business. And again, it fits perfectly from startups to scale-ups to small and medium businesses, and when they reach the horizons of large enterprises, and how this DNA is adopted compared to the North Star that they've set on their vision of being digitally mature. Now, this DNA travels and traverses across certain factors. So we could be looking at, for instance, towards the left of this, continuous innovation, and Adil, you spoke at length about the importance of innovation. So how continuously the organizations are wiring and rewiring their business, where innovation is embedded in how they operate and bring new ideas to life, and how they launch certain MVPs. Being able to build the right skills of the future and to do that dynamically is a very, very important trait in this DNA as well that we see moving forward. And we know as we speak, as we all experience the talent wars that the businesses are facing, it's an absolutely important part of that DNA to be built in. A couple of other ones across this DNA I'll speak about. So one is the ability to continuously being able to disrupt the ecosystem. I will speak a bit more about ecosystem when we address the second question of today, but it's a very important element of the DNA of the future of the business, where and the business has the ability to play in the evolving ecosystems, where the value chains are no more linear. So, and when they are no more linear, then one, the opportunity is higher, because you can be playing the roles of what your competitor played in the past or what your supplier played in the past. but also that's a challenge because that means there are new traits to learn and new tricks to learn. So extremely important that the businesses have that ability built into their DNAs of the future in terms of being able to continuously evolve in the new orchestration of ecosystems. And then there are a few others around being more nimble, being more agile, being more fluid in terms of how they operate and how they encourage, again, mobility for their people, for their business, and how they use the right tools and technology to enable that nimble business. So that concludes on the first question we were asking on how SMBs start that journey of being more digital, and what traits exactly do they practically need to be working on in order to get there. So our second question then was, okay, so that's the SMB side, but then how the big technology players and the digital and ICT and telco players are coming together in the new evolved ecosystem, as we call it, and how they support that journey of SMB growth in the economy. And I think this is a very interesting part of this topic, where really the change and the delta from where it used to be 2-3 years ago to where it will be 2-3 years from now is massive, and that's the maximum delta. And that's in how the tech ecosystem of today and future is being rewired. So which is where it is more interconnected. The definitions of role plays are continuously changing, and it's not firm definitions. The boundaries are much more sort of dotted lines and less hard boundaries. And what we see is a model that emerges is what we call the platform business model. And we see that there is an opportunity that the new ecosystem connects itself and evolves together and grows together around this platform business model. This platform business model, from our point of view, is different from a linear value chain business model of the past. And the way this platform business model works is that the private public sector comes together, including many different government entities, the tech and the software providers. A lot of the foreign direct investment is coming into such platform initiatives. Accelerators and incubators in the country play a very big role in making sure that the supply side of innovation and startups that have ambitions to grow up to SMBs is kept alive, and that pipeline is only growing. And then a very important part of that is the telco and ICT players. And we see that over the last year to 2 years in our region, in the Middle East, there have been certain strides made into that direction, where the leading telcos have placed bets on investing in platform business model, where they are at the forefront of offering those open access capabilities to the SMB and to the startups and the large enterprise sector. Now, this platform business model has certain capabilities as well. So, and that's where it becomes interesting for the businesses to sort of, as we call it, have a multiplier effect to their growth. So one, it is usually cloud-based. So the time to market is least compared to a build-up. Network effect is a very important component of it, where the more the platform is tenanted and used and it scales up, the better value the data offers. So the more cross-sectoral it becomes, from health to fintech to agri-tech and so on, the platform operators if that's a telco or whoever, their leverage also increases in terms of offering back insights that help SMBs to make certain customer-oriented decisions and product-oriented decisions. So that's where the future of the tech ecosystem is, in our view, evolving to, and is going to have a massive impact in how the ICT, digital, and telco sector evolves and places certain investment bets. The last question that we had and we wanted to address was with the intention of the SMBs to evolve to a higher growth in the countries where they operate, and with the tech ecosystem playing the role of the platform business models, as we just discussed, what are the overarching SMB challenges to which certain national entities and governments are also responding to? And what are some of the good practices which we see in various different countries when it comes to incentivization? So before we go also into incentives, when we look at the SMB challenges, and this is our research in region, we see a few of them really stand out. And I think important for us to also evolve some of the discussion on this panel today. So the first one is, depending on the size and the scale of the business, the ability of the business to really chart out an ICT and digital budget, and to have the ambition to spend on digital and ICT and technology. The second one is the skills gap. So SMBs usually are addressing a very specific pain in the industry they are working in, and that's their, the value they are bringing to the market. But to be able to, on a fast pace, evolve with the evolving technology and be able to get the skills into the business at a scale is something that, when we talk to SMBs, we hear is a massive challenge, and up to 50% of them feel that. We see that only up to 30 to 35% of SMBs believe that they have the ability to use technologies, and we spoke about the platform benefits, for instance, to automate certain parts of the SMB business. So only 30 to 35% of those businesses are really aware of that, and they have the ability to first invest and then to adopt those solutions in their business. And that's for more of the usual technologies, and here we could be talking about ERPs and cloud and so forth. But when it comes to more exponential technologies, advanced robotics, or certain IoT solutions, again, from a cloud standpoint, the numbers are even less. And we see only 16% of the surveyed SMBs who really are confident that they have, one, the know-how, the budgets, or the ability to properly take leverage of those exponential technologies. And I think what this tells us is that, one, there is a gap on helping SMBs adopt on certain different points that we discussed. Number two, how that platform model can help address the cost side of it and the budget side of it, and make it easier for SMBs to adopt and get onto the train of digital growth. Now, with that kind of picture, we see in our region and also outside of our region certain interesting incentives at at national levels being launched and addressed in order to help the SMB sector. So a couple of those, so for instance, the Singaporean one on the Smart Nation Hub, where there is the investment in the Enterprise Singapore from a platform standpoint and from the enablement standpoint of a certain prioritized sector in the SMB space. Similarly, we understand that when we look more towards Europe, so certain Finnish or Dutch or even German startup ecosystems have incentives being given by the government initiatives where, again, certain prioritized sectors and those SMBs that play a role into those prioritized sectors get benefits, whether that's from a tax holiday, tax reduction, or access to certain parts of funding nationally or the foreign direct investment. Also, we know that, for instance, in the UAE, we have the National SMB Development Program, and there are certain banks also backed by the government initiatives, where we see amazing results on how the sector is being where the sector is benefiting from those incentives. So that's the kind of the overarching picture of the challenges we see, and then how certain national level initiatives and programs are helping cover those gaps. I'd like to take a pause there and hand it back over to you as well, Mark, and happy to take any questions on what I've covered, and looking forward to more discussions.
Thanks to Hassan there for that brilliant presentation. It's now time for our Q&A session with our esteemed speakers. So, Assam, I'm going to come to you first. As you highlighted at the beginning of your session, when you were talking about business mobility, you talked that enterprises really need to have the ability to offer remote working options to their employees in the new digital economy. You talked about how Etisalat's diverse sort of portfolio of integrated solutions are empowering them. But from your perspective, what do you believe are the fundamental components SMBs need to really achieve business mobility?
Mark, you have raised a very good questions. There are multiple elements that business customer has to take into considerations for the mobility strategies. But let me shift for you three major points or three major elements. Number one is the security. Business needs to make sure that they have taken all the security measurements to protect their organizations. And there are multiple tools that in the market can help and assure the end-to-end security. One of them is the MDM on mobilities. The second element, Mark, is the productivity.
Yeah.
Providing the integrated mobile-enabled tools to the employees gives them the ability to be more productive while they are on the moves. The last but not the least, which is the very important point, is the user experience. I mean, for any mobility plan or strategies, as a city management, business should always think in terms of user experience when driving the mobility strategies. After all, your goal is to meet the user requirements and gives them what they truly desire in technology for. So these are the three major components, which I think is the most important part when it comes to the mobility strategies: the security, the productivities, and also the user experience.
Yeah, that's absolutely brilliant, Sam, and I couldn't agree with you more there, and especially in relation to your last point in terms of user experience. We know we do live in the experience economy, and as consumers, our expectations have been heightened through the advent of new technology. So I definitely think that's a very salient point in relation to user experience. Adil, I'd like to come to you. Really fascinating presentation as well. the 4-zone model, the zone management approach. The 4 key pillars of that, you said, were transformation, incubation, performance, and productivity. Found it really, really fascinating. But is there any of those pillars that take a greater priority over the other, or do they all need to work in sync to achieve, the business goals and objectives? Can you maybe elaborate a little bit more on that zone management approach?
See, with the zone management approach, Mark, it's very important that you don't the organization does not fit into a single compartment.
Yes.
So you notice that many of the organizations tend to, for example, focus on the productivity zone. It's like, okay, let me try be more efficient, be more effective, and then this is it. Or try to improve the performance. It's very important to diversify your portfolio of initiatives to cover all 4 zones. Yes, it's good to have an initiative and some funding and resources for new ideas, but that doesn't mean that you also leave improving the current products and services that you have. So it's very important. So having the 4 zones approach, it gives the leaders an overview of where they stand right now, where on one side they are in the defensive approach. They try to defend their current operating and revenue generation model.
Yeah.
Also, they have the offensive or the focus on the disruptive innovation and the future business, where how they can come up with novel ideas, novel business models, and how that can be incubated, started, and then accelerated to something that can be quite transformative in nature.
Yes. Yeah, no, that's brilliant. Thanks, Adil, for sort of reinforcing and re-emphasizing that 4-zone model and the zone management approach. Very, very interesting. Hassan, again, similar to Adil, a brilliant presentation. Some hugely fascinating statistics really emerged during your presentation. I think the one that jumped off the page at me was that only 20%, I think it was, you said, believe that organizations don't have the skills needed to succeed in the current digital economy, at a very, very low percentage. So I know you covered a lot of different aspects and challenges, but would you say talent acquisition is probably the biggest challenge in facing SMBs in the fourth industrial revolution? Or is it too simplistic to just focus on a lack of talent?
Yeah, thanks, Mark. And I think you've picked a good one. At the end of the day, I think it is the talent war, which is becoming potentially the most important differentiator in the business world. On that stat, it's that only 20% agree that they have the skills that they need. So I think it's we tend to agree with that as well. That especially in the sort of, if I can call, post-COVID world, the talent war has only multiplied by a few factors. So clearly that is one of the top in the, say, top 3 agendas for the businesses to look at. And I think very close to that would be how do they, like I'll go back into how do they orchestrate in the new ecosystem of players. I think all the tech and the rest follows, but these 2 stand out.
Yeah, and I think you highlighted as well, was it 1 in 4 don't have the budget, don't have an ICT budget as well. So I mean, that's a key problem as well in terms of having the right investment and putting it in the right, in the right areas and channels to be competitive. Absolutely,
and I think that's also the takeaways of the evolving models. So if they do have a budget challenge, then how does the new platform models are helping them to do same or even more with less? Where you have cloud, where you don't build capacity from day one, but you go and you keep switching on a cloud platform. as the business grows. Or you have many of these businesses, they have applications to be developed, websites to be developed,
Yes.
supply chains to be digitized, payments to be digitized. And those tend to be the solutions that are available off the shelf in the platforms.
Yeah.
And they can switch on as they go, scale up on their volumes. So I think while there is it's important to identify the challenge, but I think tech players and telco players are covering that gap through this platform-based model.
Oh, okay. So they're addressing that gap. Yeah, that's brilliant, Hassan. Thanks for that overview. Brilliant response to my question. Hassan, I'll bring you back in. I'll ask you all one more question each. I do appreciate all your time and all your presentation, so I don't want to keep you all too much longer. But Hassan, just in relation to obviously Etisalat, incredible company, need no introduction to anyone. You guys have been very, very supportive of the SMB community, the startup ecosystem. How important is a thriving SMB ecosystem and startup ecosystem in terms of fostering more innovation across the UAE, and how committed are Etisalat to helping make sure that is a thriving part of the UAE business?
So, Mark, just to let you know that the startup and SMEs are contributing to more than 80% of the workforce in these countries, and in fact, they're also contributing more than 60% of the country GDP. So the SME sector is very vital in these countries, and that's why the government has launched several initiatives that could support the SMEs and the souls of the startup. So startups are disrupting the traditional way we do the work models.
Yeah.
They are based on fresh, new ideas with the desire for the digital transformation and risk takings. So and therefore they are innovated to succeed. Innovation can relate to new services. It could be to new processes, business models, or functions. So indeed, the innovation is very, very important as a driver for economic progress that benefits the businesses or the consumers and also the economy as a whole. It also leads to higher productivities and also reduces the cost. All these are, I would say, it's an environment which is available in these countries, and mainly focusing on innovation and entrepreneurs as a country side is part of the 50 plan or the strategy plans.
Yeah.
Because one of the country's 50 national programs for the 50 plan is how do we make the UAE to be as a hub and attracting the SMEs in the regions. And our plan is to have 1 million SMEs through the 2030. So all these are all correlating, all these are linking, and Etisalat being one of the giants telecoms, we are also working in coordination with the country's Ministry of SMEs and the governments, how we could be the national player and support the SMEs to grow and also to run their businesses.
Yeah, no, Sam, that's fantastic. And as you just concluded there, Etisalat will play a key role in continuing to support the SMB community. So thanks a million for your contributions. Fantastic as always, and always a pleasure to hear from you, Sam. I'm going to come back to you, Adil. Again, it's very hard sometimes as a moderator to only pick a couple of questions when you cover so many interesting topics and subjects. But in relation to that 4-zone model approach, you use the term innovation discipline, and I suppose in my capacity as a journalist, there's a lot of terms I hear a lot that are quite repetitive. I haven't heard that before, that term, innovation discipline, and you talked about how it must be applied at all stages, and organizations must build innovation discipline. But could you just maybe, I suppose, reinforce or re-emphasize what actually innovation discipline is, and how organizations can achieve the innovation discipline that you say they need to be successful?
That's a very good question, Mark. Organizations tend to wave of the innovation flag when it comes to marketing itself, but not all organizations can be successful in embedding that as a discipline. And what you find, the organizations that are more successful are the organizations that are able to reinvent itself. You find lots of very cool stories from startups, from the big tech companies that have managed to disrupt the industry forever. And here I'm gonna go back to the point that you have mentioned, Eric, the importance of having the right talent in place. I talked about the six different elements or principles in order to create that discipline. I just want to emphasize on the importance of talent and having the need to invest in your own talent and attracting the right talent to make sure the innovation works. It's more or less the fuel that you use in order to inject into the organization to make the whole organization innovative. It's also important to have the right process in place. Sometimes you have the right people, but if you don't have the right system and process in place, that can be quite suffocating.
It's not going to work.
Yeah. So between these two, if you think about it, you have the right system and process in place, you have the right talent, and all of this comes under an innovation-driven leadership. Then more or less you have all the right ingredients in place. Yeah,
that's absolutely brilliant, Adil. So, as you say, talent is the fuel for achieving that innovation discipline. That's a great way to conclude your contribution today. I want to thank you once again for a brilliant presentation, and thanks for your responses to my questions as well. They were absolutely brilliant. So I'll go back to you, Hassan. Now you've got the floor for the last question, and similar to Adil, you covered. You really did cover a lot of different topics, and you really went into in-depth sort of understanding of each one. So it's hard sometimes, again, as I say, to pick one or two. But one thing that jumped out when you were talking about the digital maturity, the dimensions that's required, you talked about culture, and we hear about culture all the time, and we hear about the importance of culture, but the word culture is quite broad, it's quite vague. You conceded that it's the hardest to land. Can you just tell me a little bit more about like how you define culture in terms of for an SMB to be successful? What do you mean when you talk about how they have to have a successful culture? Is it a mindset thing?
Yeah. Again, a very good and important question, Mark. Thanks for pointing that out. So let me address this in two thoughts. So one, we looked at technology, we looked at strategy, we looked at the operations, automation and digitization abilities of SMBs, and how also they are addressing their customers and their markets from a higher point and a higher ground of growing that side. But no matter the investments that go into these four areas, if the culture from the very leadership down to those who are executing the strategy is not looking at this from one lens, then the message will get disrupted at some point or the other. And we have seen this in our experience in running digital transformations in small and big programs, where this often becomes one of the most important, if not the most important, contributors to failures. Where if you ask the same question, and I think the litmus test on this is, if you have a question on what customer success means for solving a customer problem in X amount of time, you ask that question to the CEO, and you ask the same question to the person who's solving a ticket online for a customer, you get sort of the same answer. So I think that's what defines, that's how well embedded the culture of service, the culture of being digital, agile, flexible is from top to bottom.
From top to bottom, yeah. So that's the litmus test for you, is it should be the exact same for the CEO, right the way down to the bottom. That mindset's got to run from the top to the bottom. So
absolutely.
Hassan, absolute pleasure speaking to you. Really, as I
Likewise.
say, I thought your presentation was fantastic, and your responses to the questions were brilliant. Articulated your points really, really clearly and concisely as well. So it was an absolute pleasure to moderate today's session. I want to thank you. I want to thank Adele, and I want to thank Assam as well for all your presentations and for your contributions. I think it's been a fantastic session. I'm pretty positive that our viewers will have taken a huge amount from today's session. So from myself, Mark Forger, I just want to thank all of you, thank all of our viewers for joining us today for what was an excellent session on business mobility. So that's all from me, and that's all from the guys for today. So thanks a million for joining us, and take care.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.